Hello. In this tutorial I will demonstrate how to model simple base shapes in Houdini for creating animated material effects in Unreal Engine. Let's jump straight into Houdini and change the desktop layout to technical. I start with a geometry container. Go inside and create a sphere as a reference object for the effect. Let's turn on the grid to see where we are. The sphere should be sitting on the ground. With the match size node we can fix this. We just need to set Y to minimum. Now we have our reference object always sitting on the ground. With a helix we get a base spline for a swirling effect going around the sphere. I want to project it to the surface of the reference object. Let's visualize points and normals. With the polyframe node we create the required normals. I disable the default attributes and set by tangent to n. Make frame orthogonal gives us the direction we need for the projection. Now let's create a ray node. The curve goes into the first input, and the collision object into the second. Not all points have hit the sphere, so I move the helix up and make it shorter. The ends of the projected curve look a bit jagged. With a smooth node we can relax the position of the points. Let's increase the strength. Now I want to add some distance between the curve and the reference object. With a peak node we can move the points along the normals. I want to keep the existing and disable recompute. We need a negative value here because the normals are pointing inwards and we want to move the curve points outwards. To create a ribbon shape for our effect we add a sweep node. The helix curve serves as the spine and goes into the first input. With the second input we connect a simple line as cross-section. It will be swept along the spine resulting in a flat plane. In the sweep node go to Construction tab. Turn off Transform using curve point attributes. And target up vector at start. Swap rows and columns allows to flip the front and back side of the mesh. At the UVs tab we turn on Compute UVs. In Unreal we want to animate a texture along the U or the V axis, so it's important that they are straight and aligned along the edge of the shape. This looks good. Back at the Surface tab we could adjust the rotation. For this shape I'm happy with the defaults. Apply Scale Along Curve allows to adjust the width using a ramp. Here I just want to have a tip at both ends. To fade our effect later in Unreal we can use vertex color as a mask. I want to create a gradient along the shape from white in the middle to black at the ends. Let's go up in our node tree and add a resample node. It can be used to adjust the distance between the points. And to create a curve view attribute, which is a floating number between 0 at the beginning and 1 at the end of the curve. With an attribute remap node we convert the curve view to a color attribute. CD with capital C and small d is the attribute name for color in Houdini. The color is a bit difficult to see on the thin curve, so I change my viewport settings. With the ramp we can adjust the color along the curve. Darker values at the ends will fade out the texture in Unreal. To see the color better I display the sweep geometry. Turn off UVs and lighting. Now we have a first base shape to move some texture along. We can easily modify this basic setup for animating another texture in the perpendicular direction outwards from the sphere. With the Alt key I can copy the nodes I want to modify. Let's rotate the shape so that we can move the texture radially. The shape should be wider, so I make the cross-section longer. Nice. Let's try a third option for even more variation. This time want to create the spine curve by a circular animation. I start with a circle. To align the Y position with the reference sphere, I use the centroid expression. It allows to reference the center point of other objects in the network. Let's first rename the reference object. It's not necessary, but makes it easier to understand the expression when opening and editing the project at a later time. For referencing, the path needs to be within quotation marks. With 2 dots and a slash, we go outside of the node, pick the node, and separated by comma specify the X, Y, or Z axis. Now I want to create some interesting rotation around 2 axes. Let's add a transform node and use the @frame expression to change the rotation values for the Y and Z axis over time. When we multiply it with a different factor, we get some different results. The transform node rotates by default around the world origin, but I want to rotate the circle around its own center, so I simply copy the centroid expression from before and paste it as the pivot transform Y parameter. This works. To isolate just one point from the circle, we can use the blast node. I choose points for group type, and type 0 in the group field. With delete non-selected, we remove everything except point number 0. Now let's add a trail node to accumulate the points from every frame. We need to evaluate within frame range and set the trail length long enough. The point trail looks good. But for the sweep node, we need a curve. With the add node, we can create a curve from points. At the polygons tab, we just select by group, and make sure add all points is selected. With different rotation speed, we get different looking curves. We get a full circle at frame 361. To freeze it, we can use a timeshift node. By right-clicking on the parameter name, choose Delete Channels from the context menu. Make sure that the number matches the last frame. The trail animation is frozen now. Let's duplicate the sweep setup by Alt-dragging. The trail curve serves as the spine and goes into the first input. By shortening the line, I reduce the width of the shape. In the sweep node, we can adjust the roll. Overlapping geometry can lead to flickering in the game engine, and we can easily fix this. Let's add a little bit of radius to the circle over time. For each frame, I add a 1,000th to the scale. This is too much. Let's see if a 10,000th works. Not so bad. Or a 20,000th. Maybe I can fix the overlap by tweaking the roll. Well, let's set it back to a 10,000th. For this shape, the width shouldn't be scaled. Now let's export our shapes. For easy import into Unreal, we scale everything by 100. Add a file node. In the meantime, I save my Houdini file. This allows me to use the $hip variable in the file path later. For the geometry file, choose a storage location. Now we can use the $hip option, then it will be stored next to the Houdini file. Choose a name and set the suffix to obj. Switch file mode to write. Existing files are overwritten without warning, and I recommend to always switch back to read files to avoid surprises. We can now duplicate and modify the export setup for the other shapes. Let's check the result. In the second part of the tutorial I will explain how to set up and animate the material for the effect in Unreal Engine. Thanks for watching.